Everyone, my name is Serissa Dunse, and this is my presentation on a piece of Indigenous expressive culture. So, a bit of an introduction on the piece that I chose. This is a clay sculpture titled Heyen Ina Ika, which translates to daughter, mother, grandmother. It was sculpted and painted by Raven Half Moon, an Indigenous artist. Heyen Ina Ika is in the Caddo language, the traditional language of the Caddo Nation, where Half Moon and her family is originally from. The sculpture is roughly 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide, and took about a week to fire in the kiln, its size making it one of Half Moon's largest pieces. This sculpture was made in 2020 and is one of her most influential sculptures. So, a bit of background about the artist. Raven Half Moon is from the Caddo Nation and grew up in Norman, Oklahoma. The Caddo tribe has been making pottery for thousands of years, and Half Moon has found a connection to her ancestors through her work. Her love for pottery started when she was very young, after learning about ceramics from a Caddo elder. Many of Half Moon's pieces are contemporary, however, she often uses traditional Caddo pieces as inspiration for her new pieces, referencing her duty to carry her tribe's craftwork forward into the modern day while respecting and acknowledging her people's history. Now, off to the side are some pictures of some of Half Moon's other sculptures. As you can see, they are all relatively large, and they all reference her native heritage and identity in some way. So, some significant information about the piece. The sculpture, as we can kind of get from the title, is meant to portray the matriarchal figures of her family, which include herself, her mother, and her grandmother. She stated that the sculpture represents multiple lineages and generations tied into one. Some technical components. So as stated, the sculpture is made out of clay, and glaze was used to paint the designs on the figure. Clay is used in most of Half Moon's pieces, as it embodies her work in a way other materials don't, and it has strong cultural ties. She stated, "I like to see human touch in a material. I think of how my family before me did this. We have all touched clay, and that inherently transported to my hands." So Half Moon does sculpt all of her pieces by hand, using the coil method to lay the foundation. The coil method is the traditional pottery method used by the Caddo tribe and involves making clay coils and stacking them atop each other to then later mold and shape to get the design. She fires her pieces in a kiln at the Archie Bray Foundation in Montana. The kiln is about 65 inches tall and around 80 inches in width, and is able to accommodate many of her sculptures in one piece. So, some significant aspects of the sculpture. So, as we can see, the size of the piece alone brings a lot of attention to it. Pottery that we see is often much smaller, mostly due to the difficulty of transporting such large, fragile pieces, and the fact that large pieces are really hard to fire in the kiln, and that often leads to them breaking or cracking. So as we can see, Half Moon used red glaze while painting the sculpture. She says this ties the piece back to her roots, as the red reminded her of the dirt in Oklahoma, and to serve as a reminder of all the native blood spilt throughout history. So the faces don't have many feminine features, and they were meant to look androgynous, as Half Moon wanted to bring attention to their essence rather than their looks. She stated, "I'm not worried about making them beautiful. They're meant to be a powerful presence." Another aspect that sticks out is the red wave in the middle of the bodice. Half Moon includes this wave in a lot of her pieces, and she took it directly from Caddo culture, as many of the Caddoan pieces and ceramics have the same waveform incorporated into their designs, so she can draw it back to her ancestry and their traditions. So this piece was created for many different reasons. One function of the piece is to keep past traditions alive and to bring and involve them into a modern society. Half Moon dedicates much of her work to her tribe and ancestors and those who have been creating clay sculptures and pottery for years before her. She also created the sculpture, just like many of her other pieces, to express herself, and she often incorporates herself in her works, just like this one, in order to share her identity and heritage with the world. Finally, this piece was meant for others to view and to reflect on what they see. It's meant to spark conversation and to tell a story of not only the past, but the present as well. So some of the impacts that I got while viewing this sculpture. So one of the first thing I noticed was the presence of really strong figures. So the size of the statue and the sharp features of the face mixed with like the bold colors makes the statue seem very strong and powerful, and that definitely stands out, as well as the unity that this sculpture shows. So the separate heads connected onto one bodice shows how the figures are connected and bonded to one another in a super special way. So some impact and theme connections. I was able to connect this back to two of our course themes, the first of which being cultural identity, which is defined as the sense of belonging and connection to a particular group's culture, encompassing shared beliefs, values, and practices. So this sculpture draws back not only to her culture, but the way she views herself as well, with different aspects of the piece showcasing different aspects of herself and her ancestry, highlighting her own cultural identity. Another one that I was able to draw it back to is survivance, which is described as how Indigenous people actively resist and continue to exist rather than passively surviving in the face of colonialism. So Half Moon creates her work not only to keep alive cultural traditions, but to honor the work and lives of those who came before her. Her ability to create work and to sign her name on it is just one example of the survivance shown in her art. She stated, "It's a name that my great-great-grandfather lived through, with boarding schools and genocide. It is a statement that we are still here." So Half Moon's platform and her ability to share her work that ties back to her culture really showed how survivance is present in all of her pieces. And that's all I have. Thank you.